Picture this. You are riding a horse. And this isn't a gentle trot through a meadow. This horse is wild. It's sprinting, muscles rippling, hooves pounding the earth. You are holding on for dear life. You are moving so fast that the trees are just a green blur. And suddenly, in the middle of this chaos, you see a signpost, a flash of insight, a moment of clarity that says, stop, look at where you are going. And as you fly past it at 40 miles an hour, you shout into the wind, ah, that is a point to ponder. And then you just keep riding. You don't pull the reins, you don't slow down, you just acknowledge the wisdom and keep galloping toward the cliff.
That is a terrifying image, Noah, but it's also painfully relatable.
It is, isn't it? And it's the centerpiece of a fascinating letter we received from a listener named Mustafa Sajjad Haider. He sent us this reflection on the phrase, specifically the Urdu phrase, sochne ka maqam, which translates roughly to, it is a point to ponder. His argument is that we use these heavy, profound phrases as a substitute for actually thinking. We say, life is a journey, or we need to reflect on this. But the saying of the words is where the action stops.
It's performative wisdom. We signal that we are deep, but we remain shallow. Today, I want to dig into exactly why we do that. Why does the human brain prefer to acknowledge a truth rather than act on it? We're going to look at the neuroscience of habit, the history of intellectual stagnation, and the psychology of what is called the knowing-doing gap.
Let's start with the language itself. Mustafa's note specifically mentions how we use these phrases in daily routine. We toss them out like confetti. Is there a reason words lose their weight when we overuse them?
There is, and it's a documented psychological phenomenon called semantic satiation. The term was coined by Leon James in 1962. Essentially, if you repeat a word or a phrase enough times, your brain stops processing the meaning and only processes the sound. It becomes noise. So when you say, it is a point to ponder, for the 100th time, you aren't actually pondering. You're just filling silence.
It becomes what linguists call phatic communication, right? Like saying, how are you? You don't actually want to know how I am. It's just social lubrication.
Exactly. But the danger comes when we apply that mechanism to critical life advice. If a warning sign becomes phatic, if I need to change my life becomes just a thing you say to fill the air, then you have immunized yourself against change. You feel like you've addressed the problem because you named it, but you haven't actually touched it.
That brings us back to the horse analogy from the prompt. Mustafa describes life as a rebellious horse, Sarkash Gora. He says, we see a new fact, we should pull the reins, stop, and recalibrate our destination based on this new information, but we don't. Why is it so physically hard to pull those reins?
Because the horse is real, Noah. Anatomically speaking, the horse is your basal ganglia. This is an ancient part of the brain responsible for habit loops and procedural memory. It's incredibly efficient. It wants to run on autopilot because thinking is metabolically expensive. The rider, who is supposed to pull the reins, that's your prefrontal cortex. That's the seat of executive function, logic, and long-term planning.
And the rider is weak?
The rider is easily exhausted. Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize-winning psychologist, breaks this down in Thinking, Fast, and Slow. He talks about System 1, which is fast, intuitive, and emotional. That's the galloping horse. And System 2, which is slow, deliberate, and logical. That's the act of stopping. The brain is a cognitive miser. If it has a choice between gallop and shadow-wise phrase versus stop, dismount, and analyze the map, it will choose the gallop 9 times out of 10. Stopping requires energy.
So when we say it's a point to ponder, but we keep moving, that's our System 1 hijacking the conversation. It's tricking us into thinking we've used System 2.
Precisely. It's a decoy. And this leads to what Mustafa called jamud in his text, stagnation or inertia. He asks a really provocative question. Why does fresh knowledge not incline us toward change? This is the million-dollar question in behavioral science.
I've heard this referred to as the knowing-doing gap.
Right. Jeffrey Pfeffer and Robert Sutton wrote the definitive book on this. They found that in organizations, and I'd argue in personal lives too, there is almost zero correlation between knowing the right thing to do and actually doing it. We tend to think that knowledge is the trigger for action. Like, oh, I just learned that sugar is inflammatory, therefore I will stop eating sugar.
But in reality, you eat the donut while explaining to your friend exactly how inflammatory it is.
Yes, because knowledge is cerebral, but action is behavioral. Bridging that gap requires what is called friction. You have to introduce friction to the horse's path, but we usually do the opposite. We consume information passively. We listen to podcasts like this one. We read books, and the act of consumption feels like work. It feels like progress. But it's just accumulating data on top of a galloping horse.
The prompt includes a poem that really nails this feeling of being frozen despite having information. Let me read a part of the translation. I am trembling from the freezing of thought. My worn-out traditions are tied to my sash. It would be foolish of me to keep them and lose my way. That phrase, freezing of thought, is striking. It suggests that sticking to tradition isn't just a choice. It's a form of paralysis.
It reminds me of the Semmelweis reflex. Have you heard of Ignaz Semmelweis?
The doctor who discovered hand washing, right?
Yes, in the 1840s. He was working in Vienna and he realized that if doctors simply washed their hands with chlorinated lime, mortality rates in maternity wards dropped drastically from about 18% to 1%. It was undeniable data, fresh knowledge, as Mustafa would say. But when he presented this to the medical community, did they stop the horse? Did they change their path?
They didn't. They destroyed him.
They mocked him. They were offended by the idea that gentlemen's hands could be unclean. They stuck to their worn-out traditions, specifically the theory of humors, because it was comfortable. This is the Semmelweis reflex, the automatic rejection of new information because it contradicts established norms. That is the freezing of thought. It's not that they couldn't understand him. It's that understanding him would require dismantling their entire professional identity.
That sounds exactly like the Jamud mentioned in the text. It's an active resistance. We hold on to old ways not because they work, but because they're ours. But Eloise, I want to challenge this idea slightly. Is all tradition bad? The prompt implies that relying on worn-out traditions is foolish, but doesn't tradition also stop us from making new mistakes? Isn't the horse of habit keeping us safe?
That is the tension, isn't it? The basal ganglia, the horse, evolved for survival. If you had to consciously think about how to walk or chew every time you did it, you'd never get anything done. Routine is a survival mechanism. But the prompt is talking about a specific kind of situation when fresh knowledge enters the picture, when you know the road ahead has changed, but you rely on the old map because the map feels good.
So it's about context. Tradition is fine for stability, but fatal for adaptation.
Exactly. Think about the Nokia or Kodak examples in business history. They had immense tradition and routine. They were excellent at doing what they had always done. But when the fresh knowledge of digital photography or smartphones appeared, they didn't stop the horse. They acknowledged the change. Kodak actually invented the digital camera, but they didn't let that knowledge restructure their behavior. They fell victim to their own momentum.
It's interesting how the user frames the solution. They say we need to pull the reins, stand there, and determine our path, speed, and destination anew. That word anew, as Sere now, implies a total reset. That's terrifying for most people.
It's terrifying because it implies a loss of sunk costs. If I stop the horse now, I have to admit that the last 10 miles I galloped might have been in the wrong direction. That is psychologically painful. This is why we have cognitive dissonance, a term Leon Festinger popularized. When our actions, galloping, conflict with our new knowledge, the signpost, the brain tries to resolve the tension. We have two choices: change the action or deny the knowledge.
And denying the knowledge is easier.
Much easier. We say, well, that signpost probably wasn't accurate anyway, or I'll stop at the next one. We rationalize the speed to protect our ego.
Let's bring this into the modern context. Mustafa wrote this in 2026. We are living in an era where the flow of information is faster than ever. Does that make this stopping harder?
Exponentially harder. We are in an attention economy. The algorithms that govern our lives are designed to keep the horse galloping. Scrolling is the ultimate forward motion without movement. We're bombarded with points to ponder. You see a quote on Instagram, you think, wow, so true. And then you scroll to a cat video 1 second later. The latency between receiving wisdom and discarding it has effectively dropped to 0.
So we are consuming more wisdom than any generation in history, but perhaps retaining the least.
We are drowning in information while starving for wisdom, to paraphrase E.O. Wilson. The Sochnika Maqam, the place for thinking, requires silence. It requires a void. And modern life abhors a void. We fill every second. If you're at a red light, you check your phone. If you're in an elevator, you check your phone. We have removed the physical spaces where reflection used to happen naturally.
So if we want to answer the user's final question, why does new knowledge not incline us toward change? The answer is a mix of biology, psychology, and environment.
Yes, biology, the brain wants to save energy. Psychology, we fear admitting we were wrong, sunk cost. And we prefer the comfort of the familiar, status quo bias. Environment, we have built a world that discourages the pause.
How do we break it? If I'm the writer and I realize I'm just shouting empty phrases into the wind, how do I actually pull the reins?
You have to move from sochne ka lapam to amal ka makam. The research suggests you can't just think your way out of a thinking problem. You need physical interruption. If you read a book that challenges your worldview, don't just put it on the shelf. You have to create a micro behavior immediately.
Give me an example.
Okay, let's say you learn that your sleep schedule is destroying your health. Instead of saying, that's a good point, and going to bed at 2 a.m., you physically unplug your router at 10 p.m. You force the environment to change. You don't rely on willpower. You rely on structure. You treat the new knowledge not as a suggestion, but as a command.
It's about respecting the weight of the words. I think that's what was so poignant about the user's submission. We have disrespected our own language. We've turned diamonds into gravel.
That is a beautiful way to put it. When we say it is a point to ponder, we should treat it like a stop sign, not a billboard. We need to regain the sanctity of the pause. In the poem, the narrator laments being tied to fossilized traditions. The only way to untie that knot is to stop moving long enough to pick at the threads.
And that requires heat. The poem asks, where should I go to find a little warmth?
The warmth comes from the friction of change. It comes from the discomfort of doing something new. If you aren't uncomfortable, you're not changing. You're just galloping.
A powerful place to leave it. To our listener, Mustafa, thank you for this profound reminder. It really was a point to ponder, and hopefully for all of us, a point to stop and change direction.